the problem that we have here locally is the inconsistency. Summertime, or leading into summertime, you might have a 25, 26, 27 degree day for 3 days in a row, and it will just tank to 16, 17.
Can I ask what kind of effect that has on the people in Melbourne?
What you have is that typical cold climate and drop-headedness. And I also lived in Sweden, and I noticed it absolutely everywhere in Sweden. And when the sunshine comes out, there's a little bit of warmth behind it. The mood is better. Everyone's at the cafe. Hey mate, how you going? How's the day? Yeah, great.
You're not just interested in mood, right? You also want to know about whether living somewhere sunny has an effect on other health conditions. Anything in particular?
No, not really. I mean, I'm interested in the science as to whether it is actually factually better health-wise to base yourself in a warm climate, or if it's in your mind and therefore you have a better existence because your mind is a little healthier because of it. I'm not sure, and I'd love you guys to answer that.
Have you thought about moving?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is it common in Australia for people to head to hotter parts?
Extremely. You get it a lot here with people with arthritis and other conditions like that, where the doctors will say to you, hey, you probably really should consider living in a warmer climate. We have that option granted in this country.
Admittedly, most people don't have that option, but for me, living in London with its winter gloom and unpredictable summers, it does sound tempting. I've come to the little whitewashed village of Chite in a valley in Andalusia in southern Spain. There are golden mountains rising all around me, and orange trees and olive trees as far as the eye can see, and I've got to say, it's pretty idyllic. This part of Spain, where temperatures tend to stay above 20 degrees Celsius in December, is home to loads of retired British people, and they're all convinced that the weather's responsible for their excellent health.
My name's Carol. I was diagnosed with ME and fibromyalgia and had a lot of joint pain and nerve pain. When I came to live here in Spain, the heat actually made me physically better as well as psychologically. You want to go outside more rather than in England. You feel as if you want to stay in the warmth of your home.
My name is Olwen and I've lived here for 19 years, I think. When I was diagnosed with arthritis, then it just seemed like a good idea, and I talked it over with a consultant and he felt it was a good idea, so I'll be keen. I don't know if it's just that you psychologically feel better about it when the sun's shining, or whether you really feel better, but it's certainly not as achy.
My name's Tony Langham, and I've lived here on and off for about 12 years.
And you've got a heart condition, right?
I had stents put in last year, yeah. It is easier to look after your heart out here than it is in England, definitely. I mean, the cold, for one thing, can really get to you.
Do you think the weather makes a difference to your health?
Yeah, I think that certainly does, yeah. Psychologically, I think, probably, but, as we're body and mind together, obviously if it's making one thing better, it's making everything better.
Tony, Olwen and Carol all think that living somewhere warmer and drier than the UK has eased their aches and pains. But what is it that's helping? Is it the warmth from the sunshine? Or the extra light from a sky not blanketed in cloud? Or is it that this sunny climate is making them feel positive, which changes their mindsets about their health conditions? Or is the sun directly improving their arthritis or angina? Well, if you're familiar with our back catalogue, you'll know Crowd Science has investigated the link between weather and pain before. And we discovered that while loads of people think there's a connection, the science has been under-researched.
For centuries, patients have said that there is this link between weather conditions and their pain, but scientists were never able to pinpoint it.
Until fairly recently. That's data scientist Anna Bokenhorst. She's one of the authors of a study which analysed data from around 10,000 people across the UK to try and get a clearer picture of what's going on. Participants with a range of conditions used their smartphones to report their daily levels of pain. Then the team cross-referenced that information with the precise weather data in their location.
And we found that higher humidity, lower air pressure and stronger winds were significantly associated with increased pain. So on the worst possible combination, which would be a humid, windy day with low pressure, painful days were 20% more likely. And interestingly, we didn't find a link between temperature and pain, or between rain and pain.
That's interesting because low pressure weather tends to be stormy or cloudy, and cloud means less sunshine. And yet, there's no statistically significant link between pain levels and rain or temperature. In general, people were likely to suffer just as much when it was hot. Which might sound surprising to people like Carol and Olwen and Tony, who say they're less achy and more mobile now they've settled under the Spanish sun. But they did all mention the physical and psychological aspects of waking up to sunshine and blue skies. So could something else be going on?
One option is that warm, nice weather may affect people's mood, because we saw in our study that people's mood had a strong relationship with pain. And that was even stronger than the link between weather and pain. Of course, you have a bit of a chicken and egg question. So we actually couldn't determine what came first, the bad mood or a lot of pain. And I think if you suffer a lot of pain and all the daily living activities get much harder, then that may also affect your mood.
Okay, but there is a possibility that even if you're suffering from chronic pain, there's some sort of positive mood benefit from having lovely sunny weather, and that may influence your pain levels.
Yes. I read one interesting article where they sent people from Norway to Spain to benefit from the climate. And I think there, during the whole study period, which maybe was 1 month or so, they didn't see any differences. But the first couple of days, people were both happier and more pain-free than they were in their home location.
Despite the lack of hard scientific evidence that hotter weather is actually better for people suffering painful conditions, something about putting folk out into the sunshine does seem to trick some people's brains into feeling less pain. Kind of like a warm placebo. Anna mentioned Norwegians who make winter trips to Spain to benefit from the Mediterranean climate. They felt happier when they first arrived. If you've ever been to Norway, you'll know it gets very cold and very dark in the winter. Some bits of the country see absolutely no sunshine for months on end. And I'm intrigued.
I've got one side of the bag that's got my sandals and shorts and t-shirts, and then the other side is hats, gloves and thermals.
Which is how I find myself swapping the orange groves of Andalusia for a small snowy town 3 hours west of Oslo.
Ooh, that is bracing.
Called Rjukan.
These guys do winter differently to people in southern Spain, clearly. We've just arrived in Rjukan, and let me just say it's a lot colder than it was in Spain. My fingers are freezing, and that's partly because for 6 months of the year in this valley the sun doesn't reach the town at all. Until a few years ago, the only way people could catch any rays was to take a cable car to the top of one of the mountains overlooking the town. I'm going to take a ride to the top and find out what a difference it makes for people who live their life in the shadows.
From the top of the cable car, you can look down onto the long, narrow streets blanketed in blue shade at the bottom of a valley formed by 2 walls of mountains. It does seem like a strange place to build a town, and yes, Rjukan is relatively young, founded in the early 1900s, when an entrepreneur realised that the long waterfall coming off one of those mountains could be tapped for a hydroelectric power plant. And it was the hydroelectric company that built the cable car so that its employees could travel to the top and feel the sun on their faces.
If you go to the top of the station, to the green point, you might reach the sun, maybe?
Probably sun chasing. You guys have come up here. Can I ask, do you live in Norway?
Yes.
Yeah. We live in Oslo.
Yeah.
And you thought, what, I'll come to the valley with no sunshine just to feel better about how much sunshine there is in Oslo.
Yeah, that's true.
I've always thought that, of course the sun is something you need, and you need that to survive and live, and the fact that people actually live here without it, it's fascinating.
Fascinating may be one way to describe life in Rjukan, but for many people here, the winter is pretty hard. For a start, we use direct sunshine to make vitamin D, which might play a role in regulating mood and is well known to guard against many conditions from colds to cardiovascular disease. Sunshine also plays a key role in a mental illness, sometimes called seasonal affective disorder or SAD. This form of winter depression happens when we make too much of a hormone called melatonin, which has a production process regulated by sunlight. Not enough light, and our body clocks are thrown off their regular rhythm, triggering all sorts of symptoms, including a lack of energy,
more need to sleep, reduce movement, more appetite, especially on sweets, weight gain, social withdrawal, and reduce sex drive.
and according to town psychologist Bjørn Birkeland, Rjukan has higher levels of SAD than other parts of Norway.
The rest of Norway, we think it's about 5 to 10%, and in Rjukan we estimated to 15-16%.
Can you treat it?
Yes, with sun and light. It's the only method.
So he prescribes light therapy, which is what it sounds like, a big bright lamp to sit in front of for 30 minutes every morning to try and combat the problem. But even for people without SAD, the option of travelling to the top of the mountain to see sunshine didn't quite cut it.
I moved there in 2002, new conditions, but still was very strange because we moved in the autumn, just when the sun started to disappear.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah.
So, how bad was it?
The first impression was quite bad. It was more the idea that the sun is disappearing, especially in the autumn time. It's a very big difference between being in the sun and being in the shadow, because it pushed down the cold somehow. And I mean, the town, it never dries up.
How did it make you feel?
Desperate, probably. And then I thought, yeah, but why not just reflect it down to one place? And there will always be sun in this place if it's a sunny day. And then I went to the municipality and proposed the idea. I wrote a document, and then I found out it was an old idea from 1913, was the first time. And it's been repeated a lot of times.
Okay, so every generation someone comes along and goes, why don't we do this?
Yeah.
And then nothing happens.
And then nothing happens. That's the difference between me and the others, is that maybe I was stupid, so I just never gave up and spent my time on it.
Martin Anderson might call himself stupid, but his proposal had a genius simplicity to it. I arrived in Rjukan on a sunny day, by which I mean you could see the bright sunshine glinting off the mountaintops. Well, Martin wanted to put some massive mirrors up there and angle them to reflect light down into the town. And in 2013, 100 years after Rjukan's founder had first suggested something similar, its now world-famous sun mirrors were levered into place.
The mirrors are 51 square meters altogether. Coming down, you get 90% of being in the direct sunlight. So it's 3 mirrors who goes to the same spot. It's on the main square in town. It increase and decrease during the day, but 300 to 600 square meters you get.
So 3 mirrors, each about the size of a bus, reflecting light down into the town square.
It becomes a very nice spot. It's like a theater, light comes down. It is like being in the sun.
At this point, you're probably wanting me to head to the town square, feel that sun on my face, and talk to all the locals I find there sunning themselves. But the town square in Rjukan is looking empty and bleak, because this winter, all 3 of Rjukan's mirrors have broken down. To get the sunshine in the same spot as the sun's position changes, the mirrors have to undergo micro-adjustments to their angles. It's all coordinated by a computer system, and sadly, that connection crashed about a week before I arrived. But Martin takes me outside anyway to look up at the mirrors and paint a picture of life in the town when they work.
Now you see 2 is flat, slide down.
Yes, yes,
and 1
yes.
is more
Is this whole square lit up by the mirrors?
No, not the whole, just in front here.
So, what, people gather here and just point their faces to the sun and say,
they
"Burn me
will,
now"?
And a lot of tourists comes here to just be in this spot. It's very funny, you drag them into a dark valley just to see the sun. Reflected sun.
But it's special sun exactly because it's reflected. I mean, is it the same sun?
No, it's just an image of the sun, but it makes a very nice contrast to the rest of the place. I call it like a smiling machine, because people, they come in and then everybody smiles.
Can you tell me how people are reacting to not having their winter sunshine?
I hope they burn cars in the street.
How do you feel about not being able to pull into this square and just
I think it's very sad, very sad. It's a big plus to have this little spot of sunlight. When it's not there, it becomes more gloomy, and it should be.
Rukan is showing me how radically the sun can alter our behaviour. The mirrors there act as a magnet for bringing people together at the height of winter, even for just a few minutes. They also remind them what's round the corner, spring. The residents celebrate the return of the sunshine in March with a massive fancy dress party. And that chimes with the research. While most of the studies on mood and weather are inconclusive, the importance of seeing sunshine at certain times of the year is becoming better established. Oscar Ibarra is a professor of organisational behaviour at the University of Illinois in the US. He was part of a team that discovered that seasonal sunshine not only makes us happier, it can also help us to think more clearly.
Previous work had looked at simply associating whether it was temperature or pressure with how people would feel. And our approach was a little different, and we thought there would be more nuance in that. What might matter more is the season, right? Because after a while, if you're deep into the summer, another warm day is just not, it won't have the same effect as the first few warm days in spring, for instance.
Nuance. Because we humans are complex, and Oscar's team thought a sunny day in the right context might have a strong effect. They designed a series of experiments to test how much of an effect seasonal differences had on mood and cognition, and they found two factors were important.
The temperature and amount of sunlight have to be, I won't say just right, but compared to what they've been, they have to be more agreeable. And then in addition to that, you have to be able to spend time outside in that nice weather. So specifically what we found out is that as the weather turned nicer, especially after a northern winter, and people got to spend time out in that nicer weather, then what you saw was that was associated with better moods and also with better memory performance. And in that one study where we also looked at the degree to which they updated their beliefs, nicer weather as well was associated with people's willingness to update a prior belief that they had about an individual.
So all sorts of bits to do with how our brains process information seems to change. It seems to be affected by a kind of a mixture of this sweet spot of it's got to be the right temperature, it's got to be warmer than it had been. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Yes, and you have to be able to be outside in that nicer temperature.
Okay. Is there a minimum amount of outside time that you need for this to work?
Sort of the breaking point between where you started seeing benefits versus no benefits was around 30 minutes. It's unclear whether, depending on just exactly where you were in the season, it would be less time than that or more.
You mentioned seasons. Is there a particular season? Is there a time of year when this sunshine and warmth makes a difference?
What we showed in the studies is that it's really coming out of the cold winter season that you see these benefits. So once you start transitioning into the spring and summer. And that's related to this idea that there is a sense of novelty associated with it. And what is it that, in a sense, represents the largest change from where you've been?
It makes sense. If you live somewhere that's sunny and 19 degrees all year round, then you kind of get used to it, I suppose. It's not a treat anymore.
Yes, it's not a treat anymore. And take it from somebody who grew up in a place that had more than 300 days of sunshine every year.
Whereabouts do you grow up?
I was born and raised in a little town called Alpine in West Texas. It's sunny all the time. So you asked me earlier what the weather was like here in Urbana, and I said it was cloudy. Sometimes I don't mind the cloudy days. Still, after this winter, I'm sure I will enjoy the nicer weather. But, too much of something can become oppressive.
So it really doesn't need to be all that hot for us to experience mood and cognitive benefits. We just need a shift from colder to warmer, so a change of season, like spring, like they have in Norway. That reappearance of the sun seems to be more important than how much heat it's giving off, which is lucky because March in Rjukan is still pretty chilly. The sweet spot seems to be around 20 degrees centigrade, and even that needs to not be a constant because we quickly start taking any weather pattern for granted. Of course, too much sunshine can also cause all sorts of other problems, like skin cancer and heat stroke. And as more parts of this planet hit 50+ degrees, it is worth looking at the negatives that sunshine and heat can have on our health and well-being. Professor Solomon Shang is director of the Global Policy Lab at the University of California, Berkeley, and has found evidence dating back 10,000 years that high temperatures can actually be really harmful for how we humans behave.
We looked at studies that have been conducted, around the world, and what we saw was a repeating pattern where when the climate in the historical record shifted to conditions that were not so favorable, to people, not favorable to agriculture, we saw higher rates of conflict, violence, or things you might call, the collapse of civilizations. So there's lots of different examples, whether you look at the Maya in Central America, or you look at Angkor Wat in Southeast Asia, which societies, were faced with very long droughts or extremely cold conditions if you're very far north for a long time, or extremely hot conditions for a long time. And we see that put a lot of stress on these societies, and to the point where in many cases governments collapsed, and that was really the end of those communities.
I'm intrigued. How do you pinpoint the role of climate in the collapse of an entire civilization?
It's challenging to say that the climate was the only reason why a society broke down. In many cases, what you see is a pattern of overlapping stresses. So, for example, in the case of Angkor Wat, they were at war with their neighboring city for a long time. At the same time, they had to support the growing population, and then they were faced with a multi-year drought that they were trying to cope with and manage. And sometimes it just turns out to be too much. And I think we see that over and over again.
Can you link that to a change in temperature in particular, or is it just if it's normally somewhere that's hot and relatively arid and suddenly there's a lot of rainfall, or vice versa?
So when we look in deep history, it's actually much easier to track changes in rainfall. But we also see that in the modern period, temperature plays a really important role. And in particular, as it gets hotter and hotter, we tend to see it really affect how people make decisions, their mood, and their propensity for conflict.
How much of a temperature rise is needed to see these effects depends on the situation. But Solomon says an increase in heat and an increase in conflict go hand in hand. So, as it gets hotter, more people engage in violent behaviour, and every degree matters. You can measure this in all sorts of ways. His approach was to get students to play certain games and then fiddle with the thermostat and watch what happened.
There's a game called The Joy of Destruction. Essentially, students can destroy gift cards that they get as winnings, and they can destroy another person's winnings for no benefit of their own. They just see that the gift cards get cut up. And so this is kind of measuring how much satisfaction someone gets from watching someone else be harmed. And what we did is we put half the students randomly into an environment that was pretty cool, like normal room temperature, and half the students went into a setting in which we really cranked up the heat and made it very, very uncomfortably warm, and they were in there for many hours. What we actually saw is that when the students were randomly put to the hot room, they were destroying over 10% more of the other students' assets when it didn't really help them in any other discernible way. What we take away from that is that the students were somehow enjoying destroying someone else's material goods as a response to changes in their environment. And you know, we want to be very careful here because there have been some really contentious political elections happening just before we were doing all our experiments. And one of the communities involved really felt like the election was stolen from them. And it turned out that the students that seemed to be experiencing all that frustration in the real world, some of it was carrying over into the experiment, and that was the community of students that seemed to be feeling the most satisfaction from destroying other people's assets. And so people face external frustration. You know, we have to normally try to contain that and accept those problems, but in some cases we burst out, we do things that hurt other people. And what we see, I think, over and over is that higher temperatures give us a shorter fuse. We are less able to control those frustrations, and they end up coming to the surface and sometimes hurting other people.
Solomon's research suggests that hotter temperatures impact how well people can deal with the stresses and strains of ordinary life. He's found gang violence and murders increase as the mercury rises. But is it that we're all getting hot and bothered and reacting more impulsively to stressful situations? Or is it just the case that warmer weather means more people are likely to go outside, and more people on the streets means more opportunities to commit crimes? Solomon says it might be both. Certainly car theft rates go down when it's too cold to stand outside and break into cars, but there is a growing school of thought that heat might actually be doing something to our brains to make us behave differently. Solomon stressed that he's an economist, so this really isn't his field, but he did give me a rough summary.
You know, like a third of the calories you eat get burned by your brain. So your brain gets really, really warm. It's like a computer just running all the time. And all of that heat has to go somewhere. So it actually comes out in your jugular vein, your throat, down your neck, and then spreads out to your skin, where your skin then releases that heat to your external environment. And so as the temperature around you gets hotter and hotter, your skin doesn't work as well to cool you down. And so that goes back upstream, and what you see is that your brain temperature actually goes up. And so it's possible that that is affecting people's judgment, their decision making, how their brain works. It's also possible that some of the effect of temperature is discomfort or distraction. It just makes it harder to keep it together. And so trying to figure out, which one of those things it is quite a challenge.
I know that our body works really hard to keep our temperatures constant, but it could be that a small change in temperature is basically making us overheat a bit like computers.
I mean, that seems like it could be the case. And one of my former students, Patrick Bayless, did this really interesting study where he basically just looked at 1 billion different tweets from all across the United States, and what he saw is that when it gets hotter and hotter, people tweet fewer smiley faces and more frowny faces. When it gets hotter, people swear more in their tweets. And so it really looks like something about just like how we feel about the world around us changes as it gets warmer. It could be that our brains are just like overheating a little, or it could just be something else about our mood, like your caller asked.
So did he establish an optimum temperature where people seem to be tweeting, more happy emojis and less swearing?
Yeah, so in his case, he found that people are very comfortable at the temperatures you would expect. So depending where you are in the world, around like 25 C, people know when they're comfortable and they're feeling good. I think that's what's good for the human body. I think we all sort of have some intuition about that, and we try to seek it out. But that's one reason we don't always realize, I think, how much the environment around us, the temperature, affects our mood. It's very hard to be so self-aware that you realize that every time you get a little bit warmer, you also get a little bit crankier.
So much of the research into our behaviour and the weather is irritatingly fuzzy. Growing a human in optimum healthy conditions appears to be a lot more complicated than growing a tomato plant. Some of us claim to love the winter cold, others flourish in bikini weather. So what can I say with confidence? Serotonin is a key hormone that stabilises our mood and feelings of happiness. Scientists who've looked at how sunshine affects the levels of serotonin we're able to process in the spring and summer have concluded it's not about temperature, but access to daylight and outside direct daylight that makes a difference. But it does seem that our decision-making abilities can be affected by warm weather. After a cold spring, we're more likely to perform well on certain tasks when we've been out in the sunshine. But the heat sensitivity works two ways. Once we start feeling uncomfortable in that sunshine, when it's too hot, we become less good at problem solving and more likely to behave irrationally. Listener Michael wondered if it's healthier for us to live in a warm and sunny climate, and it's a question which will influence billions of lives, whether we like it or not, thanks to climate change. There are certain species where an extra degree of warmth is a matter of life or death. For us, it's more subtle, but still really important, and that's why economists like Solomon are getting involved. Global warming will affect our behaviours and health, and he wants to know how. Although most of us don't have the luxury of moving elsewhere, we are uniquely positioned as the species that does all this research to work out how a warmer world will alter us, so we can at least face the future better prepared. Thank you to Michael in Australia for asking this question, and over to him for the credits.
We've reached the end of this week's Crowd Science. Today's question came from me, Michael Galea, in gloomy Melbourne. The show was presented by Marnie Chesterton and produced by Marika Peters. If you've got something that's been bugging you and you want the BBC team to investigate, write to them. The email address is crap.
一位无头僧人正在吹拉弹唱，接受了这个凄凉之地发生的故事。要想了解这首诗，弄懂这一关的剧情内容，我们需要从引神途中的故事开始说起。我是你们的啾啾，本期给大家带来黑神话第二回风起黄昏，黄风岭相关的剧情。在沙国王夫子的介绍中提到了斯哈里国，没错，斯哈里国正是这一关天兵人会抵达的地点，而且会与隐藏 BOSS 副板进行战斗。首先，我们来聊聊第一句歌词包含的故事：黄风岭800里，曾是关外富饶地。斯哈里国因受副板入侵而困扰，在小妖熟如手的剧情中提到，平定副板的战争时，斯哈里国曾组建过一支四羽军，他们用的是连发数箭的龙虎连弩和扎穿铁胆的四羽大杆。弩手们拿到兵器时非常振奋，他们讨论着要怎么利用手上的武器结合自己的刻苦训练去打败副板，两相加持必可一战告捷。然而，他们产生了战术中的矛盾，有人说先射副板的眼睛，有人说先射副板的脚，争论起来没有结果，众人决定以此为赌，在战场上证明自己。结果真打起来就不是这样的，终将是大败而归，就没有两支箭射在同一个地方了。这是原话。天下大事，兴起则无有不胜，心散则自取其败也。最后，黄毛雕鼠平定了灾害，国王十分敬重他，将其奉为了国师。无论朝政大事，民生细务，必先征其意见，听其看法。国王有3个王子，大王子在副板大战中军功累累，被封为鹦鹉将军。黄毛雕鼠被封为国师之后，在他的控制之下，国王颁布了禁鼠令，全国上下以鼠为天佑之物，不可扑杀，违者监押。国王亲审，此令一出，方圆100里的鼠妖俱往流沙国迁徙。其实百姓与群妖混住，都有不洁之事，但惧怕国王法令，而暗自忍耐。是时，翰林院学士们发起联名上书，建言国王修改法令，将鼠妖迁居城西南角安置，让百姓能够享得太平。翰林院的一位老学究在百城联名上书之日有个凶卦，于是就让自己的下属跟自己一起告病回家。但年轻的弟子们毫不为意，在老学究刚刚步出皇庭，自然是被御林军扑杀。多年以后，皇帝也不参加早朝了，整个国家被国师黄毛雕鼠操控。某一天，这位老学究照镜子，就发现自己的脸也变成了老鼠的模样。此乃歌词的第2句：一朝鼠患凭空起，一念瘴气渺人迹。都说这第3句的歌词：无父无君无法纪，为非作歹有天庇，就要说回大王子的故事。在妖怪头目沙大郎的故事中提到，大王子因阵前有功，被封为鹦鹉将军，正是春风得意之时。结果却被一个妖怪国师抢了风采，内心极是不满。他借着鼠妖作乱为由，四处拉拢朝臣上书，要夺了国师的权位。这天正值国师的诞辰， 看到举国上下都是国师的表现，二话不说，当众掀了香案。国王一怒之下将大王子下了监牢。这个老鼠国师呢，还替大王子说好话，这不说不要紧，一说吧，国王越来越觉得这个大王子不像人。另一头，监狱里的大王子可就惨了。刚开始还很倔，后来被折磨得直求饶，但是呢，心里呢还是非常的愤恨，下定决心出去以后就杀光了老鼠。这天迟迟没有等到监狱的饭菜，正在他疑惑的时候，牢房里的锁都开了。但他出去一看，那外头往来穿梭的侍卫大臣没有一个人模人样，都是些穿着衣袍的老鼠。就在他以为国师这只鼠妖篡了皇位之时，闯进了父亲所在的宫殿，一只矮矬的老鼠以其父之声叫唤了他2句，在他眼里，这必定是一只假冒父亲的鼠妖啊！大王子一把夺过侍卫的刀，劈向了国王。殿内乱作一团，只有鼠司空抬了面铜镜，让大王子自己看看。结果大王子才发现自己也变成了一只大老鼠。再到后来，大王子得了癔症，7情不全，6亲难认，被关起来幽居不出。沙王子揪心疾首，幸而他还剩了2个儿子。3儿子呢，饱读诗书，喜欢佛法。可是父亲颁布的禁鼠令的操作让他有点看不明白。看到国王斩杀一批上书的大臣，发现有救了，赶紧就跑路了。现在国王身边只剩下了2王子。2王子天生神力，但也有些憨憨傻傻的。以前老爹最不疼他，现在偏偏只剩下他。此乃第3句歌词：无父无君无法纪，为非作歹有天替。幸得大圣借佛力，邪风一时眼睛奇。最后这句歌词呢，却是对应取经的时间线。这里我们就要回到原著了。取经人路过之后，黄风怪手下的虎先锋用计将唐僧抓入了洞府，然后呢，这虎先锋就被孙悟空和猪八戒给打死了。但是黄风怪是有点本事的，孙悟空搞不定他，听说他害怕灵吉菩萨，就把灵吉菩萨给请了过来，用飞龙杖降服了黄风怪之后，救出了唐僧。没错，以上就是开场时这首歌隐藏的故事。多年以后呢，黄风大圣回来了。回来的第一件事，他就遇到了麻烦。虎先锋的2个儿子找上门来了。不知道大家记不记得，在原著中，老的虎先锋已经被悟空给打死了。但没有让他想到的是，虎先锋的膝下正好有2位儿子。这里呢，我们称他为虎哥和虎弟。在虎先锋的图鉴中有提到，黄风怪不在的日子里，2个小虎先锋痛定思痛，仿照着父亲的模式管理着山中的妖怪。但是呢，这次有了新的规矩，不能随意的祸害生灵。虎哥呢，甚至还定好了护送过路好人的规则，不然下次又惹到什么取经2人2条命都不够用的。然后呢，又因为特别正义，管得特别好，虎兄虎弟还被村民们供奉起来，大家叫那位大的叫做虎神。那虎弟心里就不服了，怎么我也管事儿？我看起来就像跟班儿。每每提及山中之虎，大家想到都是虎哥啊。俗话说得好，一山不容2虎，这一来二去的，没有我虎弟的位置啊。但他呢也不好说什么。还记得之前说的得到了金魄的山神吗？山神变成了石虎，山里还出现了很多石精。他们跟着虎兄弟一起大力发展基建，总的来说日子还算不错。那小虎先锋就是刚才我们说的这个虎弟，他听闻黄风大圣回来了，然而只要杀黄风大圣为父报仇，所有虎兄赶走鼠妖。虎兄觉得有理，应承下来，结果呢2个送人头都打不过，虎哥只能俯首称臣，并且求着黄风大圣饶弟弟一命。黄风大圣也不计较，正好缺人手，就封了虎哥一个虎先锋的称号，还赶走了虎弟。这下虎弟更破防了啊！先锋也是哥哥的，自己还要被赶走，然后呢就负气出走，永远不回来了。但虎先锋啊，就是虎哥的视角就不太一样，他呢也很受委屈。这可恶的黄风怪害得他家破人亡的罪魁祸首，之前害他爹死了，这次又害他弟跑了。但他也没有办法，因为天上有人为那雕鼠撑腰。所以他只能每天吃几只老鼠泄愤，除此之外根本没有别的办法。那么大家肯定会好奇啊，虎弟离开虎哥之后去了哪里呢？其实虎弟就是本官的公主，他躲在村里的井底修炼笑具神功，所以我们在没有解锁前置剧情，但经过井口的时候，会听到这里有老虎嘶吼的声音。某一天，虎弟平静的井底修行之后被打破，有个人带着孩子来到山里寻求菩萨治疗风疾，暂住在定风庄里。这天误打误撞来到了井底，虎弟一看心生一计，将当年虎哥被民众尊称为虎神的事情安在了自己的身上，并且让男人把孩子带过来给他瞧瞧。为什么虎弟要这样做呢？其实他只是想要弥补过去被虎哥抢了的风头，弥补没有被尊重的遗憾。咆哮后山岗，装样软心肠。从这句诗就能看出来，他并不是真正的大善之人。 小男孩呢也挺喜欢虎力的，还虎神虎神的叫，极大的满足了虎力的虚荣心。在治疗小孩的过程中，他还要求男人给他带活人过来供他吃。为了救孩子，男人只能照做。这种为虎作伥的行为后来被村民们发现了。这男人不在家，乱棍打死了小孩。男人回来之后十分生气，直接把村民给屠杀了。从风虎和虎昌两位的神隐图中，我们也能发现，每个人看问题的角度不一样，描述的东西会有所侧重。虎弟觉得自己吃人是正常的，所以根本不屑提起，更多的是在说自己怎么救这小孩。但也正是因为他要求虎昌给他带人来吃，才导致了小孩被打死，全村被屠杀，最后自己还是落了个孤零零的下场。黄风怪回来之后，我发现黄风岭上竟然生出了很多的石头精。原来当年在被灵吉抓回之前，他们把佛头石怪的精魄分给了两位山神，山神分而食之，竟然有了人心和人形。这两个山神呢，就被称为石父和石母。那既然好不容易都回来了，黄风大圣就找石母，结果石母没找着，找到一个大石头精。哎，没错，就是之前帮虎哥虎弟搞基建的那个。结果就被一群石头给拦了下来。这一拦不要紧，黄风怪心里认定了这个大石头精将会是个祸害，于是让新上任的虎先锋铲除此物。那这个时候，虎先锋听到黄风怪铲除大石精的命令呢，就不太愿意。那好歹是帮忙一起建设过山上的同事嘛，对吧？就去找这大石精说好话了啊，不如咱们一起归顺这个黄风怪，做个石先锋什么的。石先锋呢也就答应了。那这事儿呢也算完了。黄风怪归来的消息很快传了出去，沙国为了复国，带着剩下的国民投入了黄风大圣的麾下，这其中也就包括了他的憨憨二王子。那这个黄风大圣呢，觉得二王子有几分神勇，不用白不用，好歹也是个战力嘛，也就把他收下了。这个虎先锋嘛，刚才我们也提到了，因为对黄风大圣太恨了，每天都要吃几只老鼠泄愤。但是大家要知道的，沙国的人可都是变成老鼠的样子的，也就是说，这虎先锋每天都是要吃几个沙国的国民。黄风大圣不在的时候，那更加是肆无忌惮。不过幸好二王子的战力还在，稍微能维持一个微妙的平衡。这天，黄风大圣打算闭关修行，他命令石头精修几条沙道，每个沙道都有大门锁住，需要密符才能开启，并且他命令虎先锋和石头精两人各拿一道密符，只有2个密符合一才能见到他。没过多久，天命人来到了这里。画面一转，此时我们的天命人正被弓箭插成了刺猬，倒地不起。小施主来此的目的，老衲多少猜到几许。心急吃不着热面皮，暂且助你一臂之力。只见他手指轻弹，天命人身上的箭矢与伤痛一同消失。小心路上再落得一身骷髅，可没人救了。无头僧就此消散离去，但他的声音依然在提醒着天命人该如何走接下来的路。所谓是成败生死莫讲理，不强走到正道才有戏。值得一提的是，在我做这些事情的时候，已经有小伙伴通过科技的手段打穿了所有的 BOSS， 拿到了坏结局。网上呢也是有很多主播博主通关了1周目，大家开始回来寻找或者侦结这个细节。那这句话以后会不会预言着什么呢？刚步入黄风岭，路边的高坡就有许多个鼠射手等着天命人，几个射手互相掩护，且一射就是一连串，想必前面的刺猬天命人就有他们的杰作了。来到沙门村，发现正面被重兵把守，强行突破可能又要被射成刺猬。故强行走正道，往下找小路，遇到了虚狗。虚狗求助天命人找回被小蛙吞走的丹方。这所谓的小蛙，不就是波里格浪的哥们儿浪了一个波吗？它会灵活甩动雷属性的舌头，不仅能打出扫堂蛇，还能在水面打出超远程距离的雷电攻击。但这种时候肯定拦不住天命人，很快就败下阵来。作为报酬，虚狗帮天命人解锁了炼制丹药的能力。接下来用上的鼠妖来历，大家应该都知道了吧？这些人啊，都是曾经沙国的国民。找到了从侧面进入沙门村的缝隙，在这里，天命人发现了被绑住的老马，他将被这里的鼠妖送去卧虎寺上路给大王。但老马却非常自信的让我们不用管他，才自由办法。OK， 那我们就继续探索。没走几步遇到了地狼，地狼本是将军儿子手下的狗，因一次一无所获的打猎，被他的主人怪罪，并命令士兵将其打死。心疼狗狗的士兵把它葬在了一片长满灵芝的野地，并诵经。没想到那片地方反而经常传出狗叫，吵得将军儿子亲自前去查看。挖开土发现狗还活着，身上还长出了坚硬的触须，也就是现在的地狼。他看见主人异常激动，直接扑了上去，结果直接把主人给扎死了。俗话说得好，善有善报，恶有恶报呀。通过躲在村里的鼠妖，天命人得知这里的鼠妖是跟着国王来此，想复活，就是我们刚才提到的一个剧情。现在呢，石头的一个自相残杀为10的被砍下场，并且有趣的是，他们还想找到下落不明的衰王子，没错，就是离家出走的那个。 推开一扇门，天命人见到了沙国王和他的儿子沙二郎，他们正闪跑着要躲到黄蜂大王离开府邸。谈话间，他们注意到了天命人的到来，一场大战在所难免。这个二儿子偏憨，动作缓慢，使大锤打击，而沙国王呢则非常的灵敏，上腾像条丢石的远程攻击。天命人以1比2利用走位，甚至还能让他们互相残杀。不过这里根据打败的顺序会有不同的分支剧情。沙二郎的攻击大开大合，非常好打，但是先打到王子呢，国王就逃走。那如果先打死国王的话，沙二郎就会进入狂暴模式，非常的难打。总之，天命人还是最终战胜了这个局。此时，开局的无肉僧人再次出现，献上了一首精致弹唱。之后，他也是给出了接下来的一些提示。是的，这就是为什么刚才我们必须要先讲讲天命人来之前的故事，因为要见到黄蜂大圣，还需要先拿到虎先锋的符。继续深入向前，天命人在一个高坡上丢下了沙国王的血肉，引来了沙大郎。这时的他已经疯了。值得一提的是，如果前面在击杀沙二郎之后放任沙国王逃走，他也会在这里呼唤大郎，试图为儿子报仇。结果反而被失了智的大郎一口吞下。大郎曾经在讨伐妖魔中屡建奇功，但是接受不了自己变成老鼠的事实而疯掉，也因此他并没能给天命人造成太大的麻烦。反而是战斗中，大郎摔裂了一旁的墙壁，顺着裂缝，天命人进到了一个空旷的山洞。在山洞的边环上有悟空拜师菩提老祖的画面，并且得到了飞龙鳞片。回到沙门村，天命人来到了邪魂崖，沿路上能够看到很多掉落在地上的佛头。很快，天命人遇到了能散落在这个石块土的石先锋，近视能力非常的强，双手打底便能抵着周围连续地震，需要保持距离用抽棍进行击出。石先锋还能召唤出多个小个人进行远距离攻击，必须要集中且掌握节奏才能闪开。可以说他的招式是又快又慢，血还非常的厚实。费了半天劲打倒之后，得到了10之力。来到卧虎寺，进入寺门，台阶上横尸遍野，我们打坐观望。映入眼帘的又是四周的佛像，虎头雕像完好无损，而其他的佛像均是无头。镜头中央，虎先锋正在血食中享受着，第2道符正是在他的手上。原来之前的鼠妖下载供奉的便是这只虎先锋，这里可以得知虎先锋尝试吃老鼠的行为